Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at E-Residency of Estonia. If you're a globetrotting digital nomad, expat, freelancer, or somebody with a business, whether that's just you or an aspiring unicorn like some of the many other unicorns that have come out of Estonia, then look at E-Residency of Estonia the next time you're thinking about where to establish your business. E-Residency is a digital identity issued by the Republic of Estonia, which is in the European Union, to foreign nationals, that means non-Estonians, giving them digital access to the country's advanced online infrastructure and open business environment. And when I say advanced, I mean advanced. They've been doing digital for decades. E-residents can start a company 100% online from wherever they are in the world, run it remotely, open business bank accounts, and even submit their annual reports, all with their electronic ID card. It's literally international business without borders for location-independent entrepreneurs, perfect for the About Abroad audience. The next time you're thinking about where to establish your business, look at E-Residency of Estonia via the link in the show notes. Okay, now back to the episode. My guest today is Stephanie Jiroch, and if you are somebody that has ever thought, hey, I really want to move abroad, I'd love to go live in another country, but I've got kids, I can't pull them out of school, I can't uproot their life, listen to this episode and draw some inspiration from Stephanie and her young family. They've lived in 6 different countries. Her children speak multiple languages, hold multiple passports, and are getting a true global experience. It was really inspiring. I took away a lot of practical tips on how to do the whole international parenting thing, but also just a lot of fun listening to some of the ways they've learned to adapt and some of the things that her kids have learned along the way. So had a lot of fun with this one. I think you will too. I will note that there are some technical audio issues with the recording of this, so you may notice that throughout the track. Apologies in advance, but the content is great. We had to go ahead and use it anyway. So enjoy learning from Stephanie. She was a great guest to have on the show, had a lot of fun, and I think you will too. Please help me in welcoming Stephanie to About Abroad. Welcome to the show. It is so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm pumped.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We were just chatting a little bit backstage, and you started telling me the very, very abbreviated version of your of the last 8-9 years or something. And I said,
Yeah.
Stop right there. Like we got to put this on air. So I'm going to ask you to restart that and just give the audience, the people that don't know you yet, like just a real quick overview of what the last 8 or 9 years have been like since you started your sort of journey abroad.
Yeah, I made the very rash decision to move to Paris in 2012 after meeting a wonderful man. So I did that. And from there, had 2 children, moved to 6 other countries. I had my first daughter in Paris, my second daughter in Singapore. We've lived in Germany, France, Mauritius, Singapore, China, and now the US, which was not planned at all. So that's a whole separate story. And then landed in the US because of the pandemic last year. So that also was not planned. So it's been a whirlwind of, I guess, almost a decade now of just a crazy life abroad.
Wow. Yeah. And it like, does it actually kind of feel like America's sort of abroad for you now? Like it
Yeah.
feels a little bit foreign?
Yeah, I mean, we weren't planning on coming back, right? So quick story on that is we were living in China at the time and we were already in lockdown. And this was January-ish so January 2020, December 2019. People were already getting sick. And so we were already in lockdown and, It was Chinese New Year in January. And I said, well, I'll take the kids back to the US. We'll go visit friends. We'll get out of this. We're stuck in an apartment. We'll go to the US. We'll get some fresh air. And I'll come back in 3 weeks. See you guys, see you later, babe. My husband was staying in China. Surprise was on us. We didn't get to come back. They closed the borders like 2 weeks later. My husband got the last flight out through Taiwan. They weren't even doing flights out of China anymore. And it was crazy. We really did not expect to live in America. We had to get a house. We had to get a car. We had to do the things that were not on our bucket list for 2020. They mailed us all our stuff. They literally went into our apartment, packed our apartment, shipped us all our stuff, and then that was it. I mean, it was nuts.
Yeah, so I wanted to hear a little bit more about the actual moving process to like we can start with France because I think this is, something that holds a lot of people back from actually making the move is like, okay, but how do I even like take that first step? So maybe let's even just back up and go in that direction. Like, how did you initiate this process of being like, okay, I'm gonna move there and I'm gonna stay in France? Like that sounds very difficult to a lot of people. What would you say?
Yeah, so I think I got this reaction when I decided to move. It was kind of like, what are you thinking? Like how do you do it? How can you do it? What do you mean? Like and for a lot of people there was this fear and concern around the logistics, right? And when I moved, I kind of knew that from a logistical standpoint, it always gets worked out, whether it's paperwork or something like that. But the biggest hurdle was my ability to step into the unknown. So like, and I realize that sounds maybe a little esoteric, but it really was my own fears that were holding me back. So, when I looked at moving, I mentioned earlier, so I met my now husband. I had taken this trip to France and a great vacation, and I met my husband outside of a Starbucks in Paris. A very cliche American of me, but it's the only place that had free Wi-Fi. So I'm going to give Starbucks that. So I needed Wi-Fi. So I was like trying to figure out where I was going. And he stopped and asked me if I needed directions. And I said yes. And then we got to talking and, very nice. He's a super nice guy. And he's like, well, listen, we're all going, my friends and I are going salsa dancing tonight. So we went, he's like, do you want to come? And I was like, yeah. And so we went salsa dancing. And then he showed me around Paris. And it was just really cool. It was just really fun. And,
Sounds like
eventually I
a
realized,
movie script. That's like that's an amazing way to meet. Like, what a fun story to tell.
yeah, it was a really fun, and it wasn't, we can talk about this another time, but like dating was so different, and he was like, well, in France, we don't, we court you, like I'm courting you. I didn't even know he liked me, to be honest. I thought he was just being really nice, like, I guess I had dated one too many American men. No offense to American men, but I was like, it's
None
very
taken.
different. So I was like, okay, he likes me. And then we kept talking when I came back to San Francisco, and he was like, listen, like, I want to see if this could be something, and I get it. Not everyone moves to a different country for love, right? And I wanted to move not just because I had met this really great guy and I wanted to see where it was, but like, why not? Why not move? I mean, like, I had looked at my life in San Francisco. I had spent about 7 or 8 years there. It was a good life, but like, is that it? Was that it? Was that what I wanted in the like lifetime story? And I was like, gosh, how cool would it be if I had this adventure? If I said I did it, and that's a brave, bold thing to do, to like get up and go. So I said, well, all right, cool. Let's make it happen, because I knew if it didn't work out, I could come home. I could move in with a friend. I could figure it out, right? So I sold a bunch of my stuff. I put the rest in storage, and I got on a flight, and I arrived in Paris with 2 suitcases. I literally had to wear like my tall knee-high boots on the plane because they didn't fit in my luggage. Like, that tells you the priorities of me many
Maxing
years
out
ago.
that 23 kilos that you get.
Right? Like, that it was a tough one, And so God bless my husband as I got off the plane with my like 9-inch knee-high boots. And I was like, sorry, they didn't fit in the bag. So anyways, I arrive in Paris, and I think that there's this sense of like, I don't know, Emily in Paris is a kind of a cute new fun one, but there's this older sense of like what it means to move abroad. Like there's flowers and songs and birds chirping and cafe, and I mean, there's this sense of like, oh, just the joy of like moving to Europe or wherever you want to move. And it's hard. I'm not going to pretend that it was super easy and luxurious and like, I was walking around the Seine every day, like in my 9-inch heels or whatever. Like that wasn't the life. I had to meet myself culturally in a lot of places to say, hey, is this what I really believe? Do I know enough about the world? And I was really put kind of in a tailspin for a year. At the same time, though, it was the best decision I've ever made. And my fear, the thing that was going to hold me back, I'm so glad I overcame that, and I stepped into that boldness, into that fear head on, because I have been given, I mean, when you look at the last 9 years, the most extraordinary life. And I know it's not done yet, so I can't wait to see what happens like next year, right? But I have been able to say yes in places where I used to fear. And in that, yes, I've seen 6 countries. I've had 2 amazing kids. We're 9 years into our relationship. And I'm learning new languages, even though I'm not good at it. I've been able to really see things that me from a small town in Nevada, a person like me wouldn't have made it out. Like you grow up, you get the white picket fence, you get your college degree, and you get your job, and that was it. You have kids, and you go down that path, and I chose something different. I chose to bring some adventure and some diversity into my life, and into my children's lives. They've been able to see things that I never saw at that age. And I think that hopefully will impact them to be really great, kind, compassionate human beings, because they'll see that there's a bigger world out there.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it earlier, but I feel like it's just like the best possible education because the world, like we're often confined to what our expectations are for life, right? So whatever we see is
Mhm.
the absolute ceiling of our expectations. And in like that picture you painted was perfect of like, well, this is the life that I can live. I can go to college, I
Yeah.
can get a job, and then I can have kids, and then I can get the house. And like that's the thing. And that's great for a lot of people. But
Yeah.
if you have this itch to do something different, often people won't scratch it just because they don't see it as something that's within their expectations. So your kids, for instance, at a very young age have already seen that the world is their oyster. They can see
Mhm.
so much, they can experience so much. They're not confined by these invisible lines that have been drawn by governments. And there's a lot of rich culture and
Oh,
history and
yeah.
experiences and gastronomy and all kinds of things just waiting for them in all
Such
these
cool
different
stuff.
places. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing.
And yeah, I have to say this too is like, and like you said, like your path is your path, right? Like if you want whatever life you want for yourself, like go team, you know. But at the same time, like what is it that we can do to maybe push that envelope and live something bigger and brighter? And like, what if you had a really fun story of you living abroad? Or what if you had, what if there are mishaps? Okay, like, what's the worst that could happen if you went and did this thing, move abroad, travel for a year, whatever that is? What's the worst thing that could happen? Well, sure, there might be some emergencies that you just need to make sure that you kind of are prepared for. Of course, if someone gets sick, but like you've got some really fun stories, especially if you've got a family. You've got this story for your family of these funny times you've had. We one of the things we do in our family is every year we do like a picture book, and they're
Hmm.
themed by where we've lived. So we pull out the Singapore book, which was 2017. We pull out the Mauritius book, which was 2016. We pull out the French book and the German book, and we look at these photos all the time, and they're a way for us to kind of capture these really fun moments of us living abroad and doing things that maybe we wouldn't normally do now in this country, but that we did do. And I want my kids to know that we've done that we've been brave, that we've tried new things, that we've seen the world. That's a very important thing for me anyways, being a mom and just being a human, to say like, hey, we've seen things, we've experienced things, and that leads to a richness in life that I think that is uncomparable.
Yeah, I totally agree. Whether you're a 2-year-old or a 35-year-old, I feel like
Yeah.
there's so much joy to come from these new experiences and new things to learn. And it's super cool that you're giving the kids this experience early on and kind of setting that tone for life. I wonder, do you think they will continue? Like, for instance, you said your daughter was speaking Mandarin. Like how
Mhm.
will you continue that or keep that up, or will you?
Yeah, it's really important for us that that is a strong kind of foundation, the language foundation in our family. So, the girls have lost a little bit of their Mandarin since coming to the U.S. In the past year, but we are bringing that back with a tutor. That's important for us, even if it's just conversational Mandarin. They don't have to be fluent, but I do want them to understand tones and just how to get around and speak the language. For French, we incorporate French a lot into our home. So whether it's French cartoons, there's some days we only speak French in our house. It's hard for me too. And one of the things that I share with my girls is like, we do it together, and they know that mommy does not speak perfect French, and it's choppy and not lovely sometimes, and I tell them, we're learning together. And because there comes a moment in time when the kid says, hey, I prefer, maybe it's English or whatever the mother tongue is, right? And we've done a lot of kind of studies or looking at this and reading about this to understand how we can incorporate more languages in the home. And, there comes a point where they're like, gosh, English is just easier, like we like it. I don't want to learn French, mom. I don't want to do Mandarin. And one of the things I tell them is that we're in this together. I'm learning it too. When they're getting better, I'm getting better, and that's what we do as a family that travels the world together, as a family that enjoys these other cultures. We take the time to learn that culture, learn that language, and we be open to that. And so, for now, that's working. I don't know. We'll see how it works, when my kid turns like 8 or 9, if she still wants to do that. But for now, we're trying to keep that as an integral part of the family.
I love it. I love it. I wish
Yeah.
that I had that. I mean, I feel really
Right?
fortunate. I had a great upbringing, but I didn't learn any other languages, and now I'm in my 30s trying to
Yeah.
learn one. I learned a little bit of German in college, and
Oh,
actually a
wow.
little bit of Mandarin, but like not really. Just like
Sure.
just enough to basically get by. And even then, that was later in life. So if I just had this foundation of like just knowing how to conjugate verbs in another language, like
Right?
it would make it so much easier. I feel like I'm way behind the power curve.
I'm with you. I mean, I took Spanish for like 12 years, the typical middle, high school, college track. And I'm still horrible, because I didn't have that exposure when I was a kid, right? There was no way I had that exposure to any other languages when I was a kid. And so for them to even just have exposure, I'm happy that they had that. And and their ability to, one of the cool things, and I will say this, is that they and they're just so kind and sweet. But anyways, they will see, for example, someone of Asian descent, and they'll go up and start speaking Mandarin. They don't know,
Oh,
obviously, if this person is Chinese. Obviously, there are many, different types of Asian Americans here, but they don't know that they don't speak Mandarin, but they're willing to try. They want to say hi to them. And it's just so
yeah.
sweet because there's this ability for them to be kind and inclusive when they see people who look different than them, or that, even we're dipping our toes into Spanish, but we don't do a ton of Spanish, but like they will attempt to speak Spanish, right? They will attempt to speak Mandarin because they just want to go say hi. They aren't afraid of people. And that to me is so so important. I don't want the girls to be afraid of the world, and I want them to know that while there are governments and media that set the tone for a lot of the conversations we have about other cultures, inside those cultures, there are just people. And there are people like you and me. And, we need to remember that there are people in these countries, and not just the governments that are dictating, some of those policies. So the fact that they're so kind and they attempt to have conversations in languages that are not their primary tongue makes me very, very proud.
It's adorable. I'm envisioning that right now, and
Oh, yeah.
it's amazing. What a great education. I absolutely love it. We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This season is brought to you by my good friends over at Insured Nomads. They're the absolute best in the business when it comes to providing health, travel, and medical insurance for nomads, expats, and really just all forms of world travelers. I know insurance is often something that's overlooked when we're fantasizing about traveling the world, but it's absolutely necessity that we address this because often the policy you have in your home country isn't going to cover you while you're abroad. And it's also a requirement, as a lot of people may not realize, to actually buy private travel or expat insurance, as it's called sometimes, to obtain a visa or even enter certain countries. So fortunately, there are companies like Insured Nomads to help us with this. Not only do they have excellent coverage and great prices, but they're also providing a first-class experience with additional perks and best-in-class technology via their app. It's an amazing experience. I can't recommend it enough. Now, this is a company that was built by world travelers for world travelers, so they know what it's like to find yourself in a difficult medical situation abroad, and they want to keep you from having that same bad experience. So the next time you're planning a trip abroad, whether it's for a week or a lifetime, check out Insured Nomads via the link in the show notes. This week's episode is also brought to you by my partner podcast of the week, which is Counting Countries, hosted by Rick Gazarian, aka Global Gaz. If you guys are enjoying About Abroad, then I know you're going to like Counting Countries, and rather than me trying to tell you what the show's about, I thought I'd invite Rick to give us a little bit of info on what's happening over at Counting Countries. Take it away, Global Guys.
Hey now, do you know that more people have been to outer space than have traveled to every country in the world? Hard to believe. The UN says there are 193 countries in the world, and only a couple hundred people have been to every country. My name is Rick Gazarian, and I'm the host of the Counting Countries podcast. I interview the world's most traveled people in the world, like Nick Butter, who ran a marathon in every country, or Grammy Award winner singer Joss Stone, who performed in them all, or Slavik Mutari, who visited every country twice. These conversations are long and deep. I overview their trials and tribulations as these travelers explore the extreme corners of the globe. Subscribe to Counting Countries wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Bye for now.
Okay, now back to the episode.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier that got me thinking. So what would you suggest to somebody? Like, what are some of the things when you move to a new country with the kids?
Mhm.
Like, sort of your mom checklist. Like, all right, we got to get these
Yeah.
things in order. And I mean, I can imagine it revolves around school slash daycare and
Hmm.
that sort of thing. But can you kind of walk me through like some of the things that are going through your mind and maybe any in particular any challenges or tips, wise words from a veteran?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, you probably don't need all the stuff to bring with you. Like take one really cute toy because like I've seen a lot of people say, "Well, how are we gonna like bring all the stuff with us?" You don't need it. Most of the time, the kids don't even remember that they owned it. So take like the favorite toy, and then that's it. So you can travel light. You don't need a ton of stuff to move. So that's really important. I do see that happen a lot, even for parents on vacation. Like they got like 7 bags. You know what I mean? Like keep it simple. The second thing is, a big factor is travel when they're young. Don't be afraid to travel when they're young because I have to tell you, it's super easy when they're young to travel. They don't know any different and they're just following you. Sure, there might be some sleep stuff or like the time change, but like, you'll figure that out when you get there. But I have to say, traveling when they're young was 10 times easier than traveling now when they're a little bit older. Simply because when they're younger, you can lull them to sleep. They kind of just pass out. They don't really watch TV, but you can give them like crayons, right? Like on the plane or
Yeah.
whatever. That's pretty easy, to be honest, compared to like now where it's like, where's my iPad or whatever it is. Another thing is immunizations. So if you're going abroad with kids, be very mindful that each country has a very unique and different way that they immunize children and their requirements around that. So if you have immunization records, make sure you have lots of copies of those. Make sure you have digital copies. Like we have a Dropbox folder for the family. So no matter where we are, as long as we have internet, we can access important documents on our Dropbox. If we don't have them, a hard copy. But immunizations are a big deal because if you want to put your kids in a school or a creche or whatever, you're going to have to show to that school that they are properly immunized. But each immunization track is different depending on the country. In France, we got the immunizations done, but then when we moved to Mauritius, that was on a different track, so we kind of had to realign ourselves. So then we moved to Singapore, and that was on a completely different track. So like there were some years where our kids were kind of getting like boosters or shots that like back on the original track wouldn't have been required right away, right? So these are things to know. If you're going to Asia, you need like Japanese encephalitis. That is not needed anywhere else in the world, but like good to know. I mean, there are like tiny little things that you're like, oh, okay, we moved to
Do you need those
America.
kind of things to like
Yeah.
travel, just to travel there, or
Yeah.
like
So
to,
if
if it's
you're
because you're moving?
taking typically if you're traveling, you also need Japanese encephalitis. You should get that. It's super important. If you're moving, you definitely have to have it for your not carte de séjour, but your resident card. So there are certain, depending on how long you're staying, but it is important to get that, just because you'll get the nastiest of fevers. But anyways, yeah, I mean, there's like stuff like that, right? That like depending on where you're going, I think it sounds really exciting to like strap your kid on your back and like go to Thailand for a year. But like, what do you need to know about, legally being there if you're going to stay there for a while versus hopping in and out? That's a big factor. If you're wanting to really move to a country, I personally, my recommendation is look at how they support children and mothers there. In France, as a mother of a French citizen, I am allowed rights. I can get my carte de séjour immediately. I can apply to be a citizen as a mother. I don't have to apply to be as a wife, for example. So that's a factor that I look at. Obviously, if you already have kids, look at how would you be supported? Would the child be supported in school? Do you have to pay? What do you have to pay? Those types of things. Healthcare, for the majority of a lot of European countries, the healthcare is great and not expensive. And that is a different conversation than the for-profit situation that Americans find themselves in a lot of times, depending on the insurance they get. So, start to consider like what lifestyle do you want for your kids too? Do you want the outdoor lifestyle? Do you want the iPad lifestyle? Like these are all factors because depending on where you want to go, there are cultural norms there that you will probably start to adopt if you're there long enough. In France, having a kid in France was just so different. There wasn't parenting books or, how do you do this and breastfeeding. And like, there wasn't this stress around being a mom. You took your kid to the cafe for the apéro at 5 p.m. Like, why wouldn't you? Your kid goes with you. Like, why would they not? Why are your kids in so many activities? In France, you only have one activity a semester and it's on a Saturday. You don't have these after school activities every day. So looking at kind of like, what do you want to foster in your child, and what talents or activities do you want them to enjoy are parts about like, hey, where do we want to live in the world? Not just where do we want to go for vacation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting point you make about like that. You've mentioned that a couple times, and I see it here in Spain as well. There is, for like the record, I don't have any kids, but I have a lot of my friends in I'm in my mid 30s, and I have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
friends here who have kids, and I see that there is more of a laid back approach to like there's not this separation of like children and
Yeah. Yeah.
adults. It's like you all just kind of coexist. Like a good
Mm-hmm.
example is like exactly what you just mentioned. Like it's very typical here for people to go out for lunch and have a couple drinks or
Mm-hmm.
go to dinner and be sitting in what might be kind of considered like a bar, which in America we'd find like very like that's not a place for children, but like the
Right.
kids are
Right.
playing around on the floor and they're running around in the plaza right there. Like
Yep.
it's
Yep.
there's not a distinct separation, and I find I'm not sure what to make of that. I just I find it like relaxing, I guess is what I would say. Like it seems like, oh well,
Yeah.
I can keep on living. You guys keep on living, and the kids keep on living, and everybody turns out fine.
Yeah, it works out pretty well. I remember when we moved to Germany, oh gosh, I forgot the word for it now. I'm gonna have to look it up. But I remember we had some friends there who had some older daughters, and there's this thing that they would do in Germany when the kid's like 16 or 17, right? Which is like they give them alcohol or they have them smoke cigarettes, like in front of like at the family function, because they're like, well, listen, if they're gonna try it, we want them to try it with us first. We want them to be with
Yep.
us. We want it to be a safe space because they don't make drinking or a family party, they don't make it like, oh, you're a kid, you have to go away. Like it's just, hey, we're having a glass of wine at dinner. You want a glass of wine? You want to try it? They'd rather do that there than create an atmosphere where the kid is like sneaking the wine to like try it and then possibly, getting ill or something. Right. So
Yep.
they're very much like, hey, like, here you go. You know what I mean? And you enjoy with a sense of moderation because there's not this like cool, like, what is it when you like kind of create this like sense of like the doors are locked, like the red carpet kind of thing where it's like
Yeah, it's like the
everybody on
forbidden
that
fruit.
side. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what they're like, hey, listen, like we're going to drink a glass of wine and there's nothing taboo or you're, whatever about that. And you're going to be here to see that, right? And then the kids kind of are like, okay, whatever, it's not that big of a deal, right? Like they don't
Yeah.
make it a thing. They don't go like drinking up in the hills on the weekend. It's not like that's it's such a different vibe, right? So yeah, that is something about like that I loved about the French culture is that, your kids were there and that wasn't an inconvenience. They learned a lot from being there with the adults at a cafe or at the park or, like you said, at the piazza or whatever. So
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like there's more of an approach to like the kid will be there with me, not like I will be there like with the kid. Like it's like you're the kid
yeah.
will kind of be absorbed into my life and my life will continue, not like
Yes.
everything has to stop
Yeah.
and now we go down the kid path.
100%. I mean, there is a boundary that I really admire with a lot of, and I don't want to generalize because I hate that too, but at the same time, it's like I'll say European moms, right? I know each culture is different, but there is this beautiful thing that I would at least see in the French culture where, the mom didn't lose herself because she had a child. She grew and evolved because she had a child, but she didn't lose herself, so she had created this boundary where it was like, hey kiddo, you're going to creche at 3 months because I like to work and I like to create space
Hmm.
for myself, and I'm going to go to the apero at 5 and you're going to come with me because I want to see my friends, or I want, you know what I mean, like that's, and it wasn't one or the other. It's a blended vibe of like, hey, like I have this amazing kid and I have this amazing life and we can bring it together. Now it's not always amazing, there are struggles, don't get me wrong, but like it just has this feel of like, well, you don't have to stop what you're doing just because there's a child there. You can bring the child into this really beautiful way that you've created a life. And that to me really, I think, sets an example for the children too, to say, hey, like there can be more than one way to like experience my mom or my dad. They don't have to be there always at my beck and call. I'm part of a bigger community.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it sounds to me like you've got some European inclinations, so I think it's a good place to sort of start wrapping up the
Yeah.
conversation is
Yeah.
what's next for you? Do you guys want to make your way back to Europe? Do you see yourself staying in the States? Are you open to opportunities? Where's
Yeah.
the family mindset right now?
It's funny. We when we landed in the US, that obviously we were kind of juggling to make it happen here, and then with the lockdowns, we've been here longer than I think we probably expected. And we're just making sure that everything is safe enough to travel to kind of get back out there. But that's one of the things we've been asking ourselves is, what would it look like if we went back to Europe? What would it look like if we stayed here in America? And we're looking at that from kind of a holistic standpoint. We are probably, like a lot of your listeners, a family that have kind of now set up a space and a place for themselves, and they're kind of like, do you walk away from that? Do you go start something new? And we will always be a multicultural family, and we'll have so many different kind of third culture kid mentality, right? Of like, we're going to have a lot of different cultures to contend with to consider who we are. But going back to Europe is a very high likelihood for us, when everything kind of settles down, and seeing, how we would do back in the European lifestyle. So we're looking at that, and we're just kind of waiting for things to settle down and everyone to get healthy.
Yeah, I love it that you have the freedom and the flexibility to do that and to kind
Yeah.
of figure it out as it goes and figure out what makes the most sense for you all. And
Yeah.
that's a great luxury to have, and I think it's great that you guys take advantage of that. That does bring us to a question. We haven't really touched on this, but just
Mm.
briefly, what is the work setup? I mean, I think you mentioned before
Mhm.
you were working remotely. I know that you've got a marketing agency, but maybe you could touch on that to
Yeah.
shed some light for people so they kind of know what vantage point you're coming from.
Yeah, yeah. I worked online, digitally as a project manager for years. That's why I could move to Paris. The whole 9 to 5 at an office never really worked for me. So I kind of did that before moving, and then moved, and it wasn't exactly easy in terms of time change. So I'll be honest about that. Like, adjusting to a time change if your clients are all on like Pacific time really sets you up for some late nights. But that's something that, at least for me, that I had to figure out if I wanted to do, right? Everyone's different. Everyone has different ideas of how they want to work. And one of the things, if you're working overseas, is consider time changes, consider what you actually want to do and how you want to make money doing that. One of the biggest things I've seen in the expat female community, anyways, is that, there's a lot of like under earning. There's a lot of how to make money while maybe the husband is still working. Maybe you've got kids in tow. How do you make that work? I built out the digital agency about 5 years ago, and that's worked really well for me. But I set my own hours. I set a certain rate so I can make a certain amount of money without having to work more hours. So there's kind of a science to the madness in a way. But these are things to consider when you're abroad and you say, well, how am I going to make money? If you don't want to just live off savings and you want to work, there's so many ways to do that. What are your skill sets and how can you bring yourself to the table? But it's worked well for us. And, the fact that I can have clients, and I literally have clients in 4 countries. So my Rolodex is very interesting in that way because I've lived in all those countries. So that's been interesting to kind of work with so many different companies across the board. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's something to consider, right? Is like, how do you want to make money? How do you want to spend your money while you're abroad? And then what are the experiences you want to have? So that way, is working from abroad or getting a job locally something you want to do, depending on your language skills. So many factors to consider. But I was very lucky to make that work for us.
Yeah, it sounds like a great combinations, and it sounds like your husband's got a role that the company
Hmm.
kind of moves him around, or opportunities
Yeah.
open up through his work to move to kind of help make that process happen. Because it's not, I mean, as you and I both know, it's not always easy just to move to a country and be there. Often having the company that can
Oh,
help you get
totally.
there is a great advantage. So is that the case for you guys?
Yeah, and my husband, so he works as a project manager for a large company based out of France, and so they've sent him these places. Now, usually we only get about a 3 weeks notice through, so I
Oh
think
wow.
3 or 4 weeks max notice that we're moving. So I will say, while it's nice to have the company support us in getting set up in the new country, it's not always fun to have to pack up and get rid of your stuff within like 4 weeks every time. But
No,
we
that wouldn't
we
work for a lot of people. That's amazing. But you
it's
got you guys sound like a super cool, nimble family that's like up for whatever. So I kind
yeah,
of
I mean,
gather
why
that you
not, right?
you roll with the
I mean,
punches.
can you imagine you, like, get told, "Hey, like, you wanna go to Singapore next month?" I mean, like, how could you say no to that, right? Like, I mean, I feel like there's some places where it's like when they said China, I remember when it was, like, China, and I was like, "China, huh?" Like, never on my radar. Ever, ever, ever. Like, I'll be the first one to admit China was not on my radar. And when they said China, I was like, "Really?" But then it was like, "Gosh, you have an opportunity to live in China." Like, what? Mind
Yeah.
blown. Like, how could you say no? Even if it's for like a year, what a cool experience. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that part's a big factor too, is I moved to Paris, on my own. Obviously no company supporting us there. And that was tough, don't get me wrong, it was hard, and then you have the company who's moving you in between with varying levels of support. You get more support if you went to China, obviously, because that's a big move. You didn't get so much moving support when you moved to Germany, because it's just, drive through Belgium and you're basically there, where we were living in the northern part of Germany. So, you know it's been interesting that way, in looking at expat life, where the company supports that lifestyle, but then also doesn't give you a lot of time to say goodbye and to close out a chapter, but is very quick to move you to the next. At the same
Yeah.
time, we've had some cool places because of them. So that alone is well worth it.
Totally can imagine that. And there's some real interesting pros and cons there. Like, so
Mhm.
sometimes my wife and I discuss like how we're super comfortable here in Spain and Valencia. We
Mhm.
didn't plan on that being the case, but we're like we're comfortable, and that's great. But also we kind of have like, we always have itchy feet, and we're a little bit like, well, but we weren't planning on like settling down here forever when we got here. Like we want to bounce around. We want to see some other places. So I kind of wish like, in a way, that something would like force us to move somewhere. Like if they would say like, oh, you got to move to Singapore
Mhm.
next month, like cool, that I have to make that decision now, because otherwise I'm not sure I'm going to
Yeah.
at the moment. So it's kind of awesome that you have that like sort of nudge. I can also imagine how tough that would be. Like, you've got friends, you make connections, and you
Yeah.
got to start over the whole process of finding where to put the kids in school, and the moving and the packing. And I mean, it's got to be a tough and yet exciting journey. And on the other hand, you didn't choose the white picket fence path, so you kind of
Mhm.
knew a little bit what you were signing up for, and that's
Yeah.
what makes it fun, and that's kind of what you were seeking. But it doesn't mean that the stress isn't real when the process actually happens.
For sure, right? And I think one of the biggest things I can say to anybody who's considering moving abroad with kids, and I guess my biggest thing is, research the groups that are already there, so when you land, you're already connected.
Yeah, what do you
And
mean by that?
especially
Can you expand on that a little bit? Like what group? Like Facebook groups or?
Facebook group. There's a lot of Facebook groups, because Facebook is basically available anywhere, even in China. Facebook groups are a big one. I know that there's a couple of other groups across, like WhatsApp or WeChat. WeChat is the Chinese version of like the WhatsApp meets Facebook meets like everything. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But if you know what country you're going to, and you need to hit the ground running, my recommendation is you find these associations. You find, the mamas of Paris, and English speaking moms of Paris is a great group in Paris, right? Like, you find these groups to kind of say, hey, I'm coming. And you start to listen. You listen in and you listen to the conversations about what's going on there, because that'll really help set you up. A lot of these groups have resources like PDFs and printouts for newbies, right? So
Yeah.
you can go in and ask these questions, and in every big city, even in Alsace has an amazing, which is a region of France that we lived in, was they have an amazing, American group. So if you're like, hey, I'm going to this like little, town in like say Alsace, good news is Alsace has an amazing American club. So, you have to kind of research that, to get the ball rolling, and know what you're going to do when you hit the ground, because you don't want to show up and like wake up jet lagged. Your kids are jet lagged. You don't know where to get groceries. You don't understand that like baguettes and pain chocolat are like what you do in the morning. You don't go get an American breakfast on a Tuesday in France. You know what I mean? Like, you need to kind of know these things, so that way you're not left clamoring, tired, hungry, and your kids are tired and hungry, and everyone's having a real bad week. So kind of, do that research, connect with those groups, and you'll be set up for success a lot better.
Oh, that's such good advice. I think it's a perfect place to wrap up, because I was actually going to ask you to answer that question like exactly, and you
Perfect.
you answered it without even being asked. So that is absolutely perfect. One rapid fire question that I would love
Mhm.
for you to answer, because I wanted to ask the whole time and we never got around to it, is what is the most challenging part about being a multicultural family
Mm.
that from a language standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, you and your husband come from different backgrounds and are raising your kids in a third background, and they have multiple
Mhm.
passports and identities. And so I wonder how, and I will also say, I'll kind of piggyback on why I'm asking this, is this is becoming more and more normal, I think. Like maybe our parents' generation and grandparents, like things were more homogenous, but like I work at a
Mhm.
multinational company with 100 people from 40 different countries. And I would say many, most even maybe of the marriages of my coworkers with their spouses, like almost, I don't know, a very high majority of them are in a similar situation to you, where it's like two
Mhm.
different nationalities married and living in another place and have kids. So their kids have like speak multiple languages at a young age and get both sides of the coin in terms of like how the kids are raised. And so that sounds super cool on the surface. I wonder what your thoughts are on the subject as a whole, and if there are any like major challenges that and maybe even anything kind of humorous or funny that's arisen from this.
Sure. My husband and I joke every day, like, how did we end up together? Because it is not easy, to come from two very different cultures and languages and come together and choose to come together every day, and then place on top of that, excuse me, and then place on top of that the fact that you're maybe in a different culture from either one of yours original cultures, right? So I think that, for us, and what I can say about that concept and the idea of being together in a multicultural standpoint is like it takes so much strength to cast aside your ego every day and allow the relationship to flourish, because it's really easy to be like, well, my way is the right way, or I know it because my parents did it this way. And while that has value, because I think it lends itself to why you're here today, being in that relationship, whatever cultures are coming to the table or languages are coming to the table, it's that sense of being open to it, because you're creating something new and different. You are a unique couple, you are in this unique relationship. And so allowing that to come forward is really key. I know as a parent, even I get in these moments of like, am I doing this right with them? Like maybe it should be this way or maybe it should be that way, right? Like, because they are these unique beings that are having this kind of cultural melting pot moment for themselves, and they're building themselves up out of this, from a personality and cognitive developmental standpoint. It is fascinating to see how they create identity in this. But if I'm overbearing or attempting to control that, I think they lose what their true potential could be, right? And I don't know what that true potential is yet, but I'm allowing them to figure that out. So I think for a lot of it is loosening the reins of my ego to say, I don't know what's right here. I know what maybe my mom would have done, but I don't know if maybe that's what's best for this relationship or this family. And so having an open mind for that, having an open mind in conversations. There are so many times in a day that my husband and I will talk to each other and we'll look at each other because one word did not make sense to that person. And you're like, this cannot be this hard. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to, like, why don't you understand this? Like, this is what I meant by that. Right. But there's so many nuances to languages, but allowing those mistakes, allowing the misinterpretations, and just kind of rolling with it, because otherwise it becomes frustrating, and that's no fun. Nobody does well in a frustrating environment. So yeah, I think that's my biggest thing is you're not always right. You come from a culture, it has impressed upon you ways of being, but that doesn't mean it's the right way. So allow yourself to be in whatever culture you're in, whatever relationship you're in, and allow that to impress upon you, and maybe create a new way of being.
Yeah, sort of a central point of our conversation today has kind of reminded me that, you can take what you want to take and leave what you want to leave behind, whether that
Mhm.
be a big
Mhm.
picture of your life and the expectations you have for your life, or the way you raise your kids, or the way you are in your in a particular city that you're moving into, or a culture
Yeah.
that you've just immersed in, or your relationship with your spouse or significant other. Like you can you can take the good and leave the bad and kind of pick and choose, and we're not limited to just one way of doing things and one way of living. And
Mhm.
yeah, I would say you guys are embodying that very well, and living what's a really fun and exciting life from the outside looking in. And I, like I said earlier, I know that that comes like all these elements, that everything fun and exciting and adventurous has an element of like, ooh, there's frustration and
Mhm.
friction and bureaucracy and challenges
Yeah.
and whatnot. But it sounds like you guys have made the most of it, and are living a really exciting and fun life. I've personally enjoyed a lot getting to know more and have learned a lot. If and when we do have kids and we're bouncing around the world, I will think back on this discussion quite a bit. So thank you
Nice.
so much for sharing the content. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, for sure. Thanks for having me on, and yeah, I mean, it's fun, right? Like there is this really beautiful and fun way of living and seeing the world, and I am grateful that I get to share that experience with people because I think, again, like it's scary, right? And so to be able to know that other people have done it and that are doing it, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but we're doing the best we can, hopefully gives other people hope and an ability to be bold and try it for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that's it. Like you just said it so perfectly. Like it's not going to be perfect. So, and
Yeah.
there's rarely like a perfect time to do anything. Like there just
Never.
isn't ever. So, like if you have this itch, like if you've got two toddlers running around and you're thinking like, oh, I miss traveling. I used to love to travel, or oh, I never
Mhm.
traveled, but I really, really have the desire to live in France or China or Brazil or wherever it is,
Mhm.
and I have this opportunity to do so, or I could create this opportunity, but X, Y, and Z is holding you back. There will always be X, Y, Z. Like it's never the
Always.
perfect time,
Yep.
and you gotta scratch that itch. Like it's mandatory that you do, because you'll regret it for forever if you
Yeah. 100%. And what's
don't. Yeah,
waiting for you on the other side when you scratch that itch is nothing like what you think it will be. It'll probably be 10 times better. Like
yeah,
it'll have its
that is
mishaps,
so
but it'll be
true.
better.
That is something, you know what? That's such a good point. That's something that ties together like all the episodes of this podcast that I've done so far.
Mhm.
Everybody always had hesitations, for the most part. There are some people who were just nuts from the beginning and just said, "This is what I'm doing." But almost everybody had hesitations, or fears, or thought maybe
Yeah.
I shouldn't. And everybody that took that leap, whether it be to start a new business and move abroad, or make career change and start working remotely, move to another country, follow a love abroad, or whatever it be, like they all came out on the other side and like, I wouldn't have changed that. Like this ended up way better than I thought.
Yep.
And I think that's so cool.
Yep. I love that.
Yeah, that's a really really fun side to the life of living in a foreign country. Is like, even if a lot of times, even if you don't actually end up loving the country, like you learn a lot from it and it bounces you off to the next place.
Mhm.
I've talked to people who have fallen into that category, but yeah, that's just some really really great feedback, and a good perspective, I think, to lead people with. So thank you again so much, Stephanie. This was awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed
Definitely.
it, and I hope that we'll be in touch again soon.
For sure. Sounds good for me.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.